Alright, so in the interest of time, we're just going to get right into this. Is racial profiling by police a serious problem in the US? First, I think it's important to establish the existence of racial profiling at all before saying whether it's a serious problem or not. So, a good place to start this discussion might be New York City, where profiling, or potentially its lack thereof, can seemingly be seen more directly because of the stop-and-frisk policy. So, according to Mayor Bloomberg, under whose authority the stop-and-frisk policy was enacted in 2002, stop-and-frisk saves lives, and according to him, predominantly black and Hispanic lives. And if this is correct, it seems like this policy is doing some real good. Further, MacDonald of the Manhattan Institute suggests that felony crime is dropping, and I'm quoting, because police are able to intervene in suspicious behavior before it becomes a crime. And this on its face all sounds pretty good. Since Stop and Frisk was enacted in 2002, all the way through 2011, the murder rate in NYC dropped from 4.8 to 3.9 per 100,000 inhabitants, which is pretty substantial, especially in conjunction with a falling crime rate. But it seems like we may be straying away from the point of whether or not racial profiling exists at all. So, to get back on track, observers of this trend may suggest that the apparent effectiveness of this policy in and of itself proves that profiling is not an issue and may not even exist, because police are inquiring suspicious individuals based on their behavior as evidenced by the drop in the crime rate and the murder rate. So essentially the argument is that police are stopping individuals that are likely to commit crimes or are in possession of contraband. If the proportion of people stopped happens to be predominantly black or happens to be predominantly Hispanic, and that's just how it happens to be. The bottom line is that police are stopping criminal behaviors, not races, which seems pretty compelling until we start to look at some of the numbers more closely. So according to the New York Civil Liberties Union's data in 2012, a total of 532,911 New Yorkers were stopped and frisked. Now, in 2012, 89% of those stopped were totally innocent, meaning they had no contraband, were up to nothing. So, according to CQ, in 2012, only half of that 11% that wasn't totally innocent was convicted, and only 1/4 of those totally convicted ended up facing jail time. So that's 1.375% of 532,911, which comes out to about 7,300 arrests that may have prevented felony crimes in a city population of over 8 million, according to the 2010 census. So hopefully that demonstrates the ineffectiveness of this policy and suggests that falling crime rate is due to some other intervening variable. But this leaves us with a new question in deciding whether racial profiling exists here. Are the police predominantly targeting some races over others, or are they making their selections randomly? Now, if they're making their selections randomly, then we would expect the ethnic distribution of frisk victims to be pretty similar to the ethnic distribution of the population of the ethnic distribution of the city of New York City as a whole. So we'll refer back to the New York City census of 2010, in which, as I said, the population was just over 8 million. The white non-Hispanic proportion of this was 33.3%, nearly a perfect third in, as we'll see, a plurality of the ethnic population. Black non-Hispanic makes up 22.8%. Asian non-Hispanic is 12.6%, and Hispanic identifiers make up 28.6% of the population of New York City in 2010. So now referring back to the New York Civil Liberty Union's data on the stop and frisk interactions, we see a distribution entirely unrepresentative of the population that we just discussed. 52% of friskies were black, 32% Hispanic, 9% white, and 7% Asian. So based on this, it can be seen that non-whites, specifically blacks and Hispanics, are being targeted, as 91% of all the people stopped and frisked were non-white, while the white population made up 33.3% of the entire population of New York City. So hopefully this shows, in the little amount of time that I've had to discuss this, hopefully this shows convincingly enough that racial profiling on the part of the police does in fact exist. So let's move on to whether or not it's dangerous, or, as some may argue, merely an inconvenience. So first off, according to Rehabilitating Racial Profiling, a 2002 FCNL Washington newsletter, many Americans actually like the idea of racial profiling and see it as a means of reducing the likelihood of an attack or the committal of other crimes. However, according to this same newsletter, right, racial profiling has not been shown as effective in crime and attack prevention. So this again goes to show that racial profiling doesn't catch criminals, and that police are much better at identifying particular races than they are at identifying criminals at first glance. So where does this become dangerous then? If, as of right now, public opinion is that racial profiling is good. The danger comes, you could go in many different directions with this, but the direction that I've decided to go is with something called civil forfeiture. Now, for those of you who don't know what civil forfeiture is, it essentially, put simply, is the right of law enforcement to confiscate property without filing a criminal charge if the legal enforcer or officer believes that the property has or will be used in a crime. So, if, as has been seen, the police are interested in racial profiling, then it stands to reason that they may target minorities in exacting civil forfeiture. So typically the argument is that civil forfeiture is good for security and that police rarely use this right and that it'll help prevent crime, which sounds like it would work and it makes sense, but it seems to make more sense for police to abuse this policy in their own self-interest. According to an article by Donna Murch called Historicizing Ferguson, the LAPD was earning between $10 and $20 million a year on civil forfeiture alone. So this occurred in the late 1980s during the war on drugs and the war on gangs, which clearly targeted certain demographics. So with the knowledge that there's money to be made off profiling, it will of course increase its prevalence. And according to Gregory Anthony's account of Balco's book, The Rise of the Warrior Cop, there are multiple occasions where police raids are carried out at the wrong houses or even the same houses of innocent people over and over again, citing a Brooklyn couple that was raided over 50 times in a 6-year span. So now that we've discussed some of the more localized dangers of racial profiling law enforcement, we can talk about it at more of a nationwide level. So, like I said, a lot of people are really for the idea of racial profiling, particularly when it comes to, the national level in this post 9/11 age. So, if we refer back to rehabilitating racial profiling, the author brings up a post 9/11 instance in which it can be seen where this affinity for racial profiling can start to cause problems for not just minorities, but everyone. So in November 2001, of course, just right after 9/11, the Attorney General asked law enforcement officials to interview more than 5,000 people that legally entered the U.S. on a non-immigrant visa. So according to the newsletter, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, said that the selection of the interviewees wasn't based on nationality, despite the fact that almost all of them were Middle Eastern or Arabic. Now, while many support this idea of racial profiling and see it as security, they're failing to see that this provides a staggering legal precedent, as the DOJ intimated that they could hold these interviewees as detainees without bond, if they so chose, which is a violation of their civil rights. So once this is done, once it gives law enforcement reasonable ability to do it again. And this is highly dangerous for the preservation of an equal society. And so these reasons and many more that had to make it to the cutting room floor, unfortunately, provide a sound ground to say that yes, racial profiling among police and law enforcement in general is a very dangerous thing.